Welcome to Art with Addie. I'm Addie, and this is where you learn how to paint. Welcome back everybody, and happy Tuesday. I'm happy to have you here. We are going to be painting a beach sunset scene from Rocky Point, Puerto Peñasco. I was hanging out on the patio and I saw this beautiful sunset and I was like, that's super pretty, I should take a picture. I may or may not have been sipping on some tequila, okay? I definitely was. I love tequila. If this is your first time painting any of my videos, I suggest going back to one that's a little bit more simple. If you're not familiar with painting with glass, you can click on this link up here to start with wood or rock. Before we get started today, just a quick reminder to subscribe to this channel so you can get notifications when I post a new video every single Tuesday. Why am I so awkward? Alright, the first thing you're going to need is a photo frame with glass in it, and for acrylic paints you'll need at minimum black, white, red, yellow, and blue. If you have any additional colors on top of that, even better. For paintbrushes, you can get acrylic specific or multi-purpose. We're going to go from the fine tip brushes all the way up to about medium-sized brushes. A cup of water, paper towels, a palette for your paint. I just put some wax paper and taped it to the back of a cutting board. Additionally, you can get paint mixing sticks, and that just saves some paint over time. And to seal your project, Mod Podge. Here's a look at what the photo frame looks like that I found. I found this at a thrift shop, so it's a little bit beat up. So I'm going to take this apart, take the glass out. That's the portion that we're going to be painting on. As you might be able to see from this video, there's some little tiny paint splatters. I don't know how that got there, but we're gonna get rid of that with some nail polish remover. The nail polish remover and the cotton pad works really well to get any dirt, fingerprints, also that sticky residue that you get from the stickers that are on there. And just give it a nice clean wipe down here and then let it dry. There's also some little paint splatters on the actual frame, so I'm using that nail polish remover again that removes that excess paint that's on top without damaging the paint that is on the original frame here. Since the painting is going to be on the glass itself, I suggest sticking with a more neutral color for your picture frame. If you want to repaint that, you can. I suggest sticking with either black or white. First thing we're going to do is start with the skyline, and I am using a full round soft brush. I have a couple little stray hairs, so I'm just cutting those back. I have this medium shade of blue already in a tube, so we're going to start with that and just start with the top of the glass here and work our way down to about a third way down. Since glass can be a little bit more difficult to work with than say wood or rocks like I do in my other videos, we just want to be a lot more gentle with our hand when we are doing these brush strokes. For the next portion, we're going to be working on the horizon line and for the ocean water. So we're going to keep using the same brush and going one step darker with your blue. If you have a darker blue, you can go ahead and use that. If not, just add a very small amount of black to that. We're going to paint a diagonal line going from just above the bottom left-hand corner straight up across, and that is going to be where the water meets the sand. We are going to be building many more layers on top of this base coat of paint, so don't be too worried about seeing streaks in your paint right now. From there, I am going with a medium shade of brown. If you do not have a pre-mixed brown, you can mix blue, red, and yellow until you get the shade that you would like, and then you can add white or black if you would like it to be a deeper or a lighter shade of brown. We are going to use this medium shade of brown just to fill in the rest of the bottom portion of that glass. We're going to go back to working on the sky. After we've got that base coat down, we're going to use that same medium shade of blue that we first put on there and put on a second coat of that, going from the top to just about 2/3 of the way down of the sky portion of this. And again, when we're putting more layers of paint on top, we do want to keep in mind to be very gentle with how hard we are pressing that brush down so we don't peel up that paint from the glass. From there, we're going to mix up a purple shade. If you ever had a purple, that's great. I don't have one yet, so I am taking that medium shade of blue and then mixing in some bright red with it. It's a little bit too dark for me, so I'm also going to add some white just to give it more of a lavender touch. The next brush that I'm going to use is about a medium-sized, fully rounded brush that's very soft and flexible. And we're going to use just a little bit of that purple right along the left-hand side of the horizon line. In order to get all of these shades blended in well together for the sunset portion of this, we just want to be very gentle and use a small amount of paint and just slowly build it up. I'm going to go back to using that larger brush that we were using in the beginning, again with using some of that purple and just very gently putting some about mid-skyline here. From here, we're going to start working with some orange. If you do not have orange, you can mix red and yellow until you get the shade that you would like. We are going to be working with a couple of different shades for the sunset, so I'm just placing out orange, red, and white. And first I'm going to take a small amount of red and add in some orange to that so we can get a sort of bright pinkish red hue. And I'm going to add just a little bit of white just to soften that bright orangish pink color here. And then I'm going to take just a little bit of that orange and mix it in with that blob of white that we put down to make a peach color. And we're going to go back with using that large brush that we were using in the beginning, but I'm using my fingers to pinch the brush while it is still damp, just to give it more of a flatter brush so we can get some texture going on for the skyline. I am using this peachy color starting on the right hand side just below where the purple is. If you can still see that base blue color coming through, that's okay. We're going to keep putting on some more thin layers until we build it up to the colors that we would like. Using the same brush with the same technique, flattening out that brush while it's still damp, we're going to go with the brighter orange. Again, starting from the left-hand side, working our way over. And we just want to get right between where we put the purple on the horizon line and where the peach is meeting that purple above that. Now I'm going back in with that smaller brush that we were using earlier with the peach and just giving it a second layer. here I'm just creating kind of a half circle for where the sun is going to be as just a base for the background of the sun. From here we're going to use that bright kind of coral pinkish color, and we're going to just go right in at that horizon line and just blend it in just a little bit into that orange. Normally I suggest picking up the piece that you're working with so it's a little bit easier to reach certain angles, but with this glass, as you can tell, having a little bit difficult time, so for me personally it's better just to work with it on the tabletop. From here we're going to keep using that same brush, but we're going to go back in and do a second layer on that brighter orange. The less paint that you can get on your brush right now, the better and more easily you're going to be able to blend it in with that pink and the peach. Right here I'm going to go ahead and put in the first layer of the actual sun with a bright yellow. And I'm just using a little bit thicker, fuller brush for this. We're going to come back to the sky a little bit later, but for now we're going to start working on the ocean portion. And I'd like to make a little bit darker blue than the original blue that we put on there. And we're going to start from a darker blue at the horizon line and go to a lighter blue to where the water meets the sand. So here I'm just mixing a very tiny amount of black with that deeper blue that I have. I'm going back in with a brush that we were just using for the sun, so a medium, full but round brush that's still soft and flexible, and we're going to start from the horizon line, going from the left hand side, swiping over to the right. As I'm working my way down to the bottom of the water line where it meets the sand, I'm just putting a little less paint on my brush and being more gentle so we can still see that base color coming through a little bit. Using that same brush, I'm just putting on another layer of that medium shade of brown. Now this original line that I had made going diagonally, making that line that's going between the sand and the ocean, I made it a little too curved, so I'm going back in with some brown because I want to make it more of a straight line. From there, working on that sand, I'm going to make just a little bit lighter shade of brown by mixing some white to the brown that I already have. Using that same brush, I'm making some sort of squared but oblong shapes on top of the darker brown. In real life, this water was making its way back out into the ocean, so the sand is very soft and it kind of left, you know, some darker pits of like where the water was sunken in. And these are the kind of shapes that we're making right now. Since when the tide goes in and out every day a bunch of times, the patterns on the sand are going to look a little bit different, so you definitely don't have to make the exact same patterns and shapes that I'm making right now. I am putting a second layer on just portions of the shapes that I just made because the brown's going to show up just a little bit lighter the second time around with a second coat. Here I'm going back to using that medium shade of blue, but I'm adding some white to lighten it up. I'm starting at the bottom portion of the water, and I'm adding in some sort of wavy oblong shapes that go into the sand. And this is just to show the water that the tide has left behind on the sand. Again, the shapes that you're making with this light blue here does not have to be exactly the same as mine, but it should go in shape with those brown shapes that you had just made in the sand. We will be going over this portion a couple of times with different colors, layering them up. So if you can see a little bit of brown coming through this blue, that's okay. Again, here I'm just kind of making some random patterns of where these puddles were kind of left behind from the tide going out. I'm also just putting a couple random little bits of water throughout the sand just to show some smaller puddles. Next, we're going to go with a very fine tip pointed brush. And we're going to use that same shade of blue, but we're going to put in some random waves, starting from the shoreline and working our way up to the top of where the ocean meets the skyline. These lines are kind of at random shapes, random widths apart from one another. They're basically going into these small squiggly lined shapes. Some of them you can make longer, some of them shorter, and we're going to be putting in many different colors and layers to show all of the different shapes that the ocean is making here. Since in real life we can see the waves that are closer to us, they appear to be bigger and a little bit further apart. Once we start working our way up the water here, the lines that we're making are going to be smaller and a little bit closer together. Just wanted to take a moment to remind everybody to please like this video, drop me a comment, let me know what you want to see me painting for next week, and subscribe to this channel. Also, if you would like to get a sneak peek into what I am working on for the next week, follow me on my Instagram and I will post pictures to my stories and to my timeline. I'm also putting in this sort of like horizon line that's going between the actual horizon line and the ocean. This is just what I saw in the photo that I happened to take. This is totally an optional line that you can put in there. Once you start working your way up and making smaller lines, just be sure to use more of the very tip of your brush rather than slanting it to either side so you can just get small dots. Alright, from here we're going to go back to using that small, longer brush just to put in a second layer of the sun. I'm gonna go back to using that brighter orangey pink color that we made earlier. I took a break during this video so it dried. I'm just making another batch of that same color. Here we're going to start working on the reflection that is happening from the sun reflecting onto the water. And we're just going to draw a straight across lines that are going from where the sun is all the way down to where the ocean is meeting the sand. You will be putting many layers and different colors on top of this, so it doesn't need to cover the blue completely. Next, I'm going to go back in with that very fine tip brush on those outlines of the puddles that we made earlier. And I'm going to outline this portion with the pink that we were just using, just to show the reflection of that sunset in the water of the puddles. I am also using a stippling technique, which is just using the very tip of your brush and just making tiny little dots. And I'm just putting some tiny dots on top of that reflection that we made in the main body of the water. From there, I'm just adding some white to that pink color that we were using to lighten it up, just to put another layer on those puddles that we were just working on. I'm just outlining it again, not completely covering up the layer that we just put on though. Going back to using that stippling technique just on top of that main body of the water. This is just so that we can show that reflection of the light on top of that water here. This particular portion that I'm putting a highlight in is where we're actually going to show a very round, small, tiny little version of the sun. That's where the real reflection of the sun is hitting the puddle. And then later on, we will build that up to the yellow color. Since my paint dried a little bit earlier, I'm just making that same peachy color that we used up in the sunset of the sky. And I'm again using that very fine tip brush. And then I'm going to make even smaller highlights on the outline of the puddles here. Again, not completely covering the shade that we just put in with that very light pink. I just want to add small, very small strokes on here just to give it a little more depth. And here, going in with that same tiny brush and just using a little bit of the yellow to put some yellow reflection down the center of that reflection line going on the main body of the ocean. And here I'm using that same yellow color and just putting in a little bit of a highlight of where the sun actually hits the puddle outline here. I know it may seem like we are jumping back and forth to different sections of the painting, and the reason for doing that is just to allow the layer of paint to dry, so then we can then later put on a second layer without lifting the paint up underneath. Next, I am making a very, very pale blue just to add in some very light highlights back into the ocean and into the puddles. Keeping with that very fine tip brush, we're going to give the puddles some outlines, and those are going to reflect the very light reflections. I'm also using a little bit more of the side of this brush and doing a dabbing technique just to give it that kind of fluffy water look. This part doesn't really have any rhyme or reason as to where I'm putting the highlights, since it really depends on where you're standing and looking at this scene. From there, we're using the same shade of blue and the same brush, and we're just going to add some more highlights into the actual body of water. And you'll want to keep these strokes kind of keeping in the same random patterns. Some of these are squiggly, some of them are short, some of them are long. But we want to try and get the same shape that we have already made with that lighter color, but doing it just right next to that same line so that you can see both colors. Additionally, as a highlight, I'm going in and using that stippling effect again, so just using a very small amount of paint on the very tip of your brush and just pointing it straight down just to make these little tiny circles. From here, we're going to do the very center of the sun, which is going to be pure white. So we're going to use a medium-sized brush like we were using before. And this does not have to be a perfect circle in the center, but we want to make sure that it goes right up to the horizon line. I'm also getting the very center of the circle on the outline of the puddle that we made earlier. I'm just going in and putting a couple layers of the actual sun in the center to make sure that it's a bright white. From there, I am again putting in even more dots going down right the center of the reflection in the main body of the water. The very last thing that I'm going to do for this painting is go back into the reflection of the puddle. I'm just putting in a tiny bit of yellow in that to show the reflection of the sun, and also giving that layer around the sun that is in yellow just a little bit extra because I can still kind of see the paint underneath it right now. So now is a time for you to add any other little extra details or fix any little mistakes that you might have made throughout this process. And then we're going to let the painting dry for a good 24 hours before we put any sort of coating on here. And here is the finished painting. I suggest using something like Mod Podge. I generally will use a paintbrush and swipe that right over the painting, but since this is on glass, I highly suggest using a spray version of that so you don't have to actually touch this painting, just to make sure that it doesn't peel up off of the paint. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, drop me a comment, let me know what you want to see me paint next week, and be sure to subscribe to Art with Addie. If you want to see a sneak peek as to what I am working on for next week, be sure to follow me on Instagram so you can check out my stories and my timeline and see what I'm dropping for next week. It is astonishing to me that I have friends.